let's talk about these stories that we pulled up. We got one from the New York Post. Mind the tornado above us, friends. I apologize.
Pay no attention.
This is from the New York Post. ESPN star Jason Whitlock blasts Disney for feminizing sports. Yes, and I think this will play a role in the upcoming elections. In that, you've got what's happening with the NCAA swimming with Leah Thomas. And I know I've been critical of people who refuse to speak up, saying if you're not speaking up publicly, how can I defend you? Because people will just say, nobody's mad about this. What are you complaining about if you can't stand up for yourself? But I will say at the very least, these people will be secret Trump voters. Like we saw in 2016 and 2020, a large percentage of people who would not admit it, but once they get into the polling booth, they look around, look over their shoulders, and then hit Trump a million times.
The history
because of
of
things like this.
Voting, it's secret for a reason, because that's a natural part of people's minds. When they see crap out there, they don't want to have to stand up and say it, but they're going to vote the way they feel. See the lights flicker there? We in the rain now.
Wait. How did the lights flicker? We're on independent electricity.
I don't know.
Magnetic fields.
Well, so Jason, let's talk about this. Your take on the feminization of sports.
Well, I think a lot of people, it kind of went over their heads in 1996 when Disney acquired ABC and ESPN, and that once you're taken over by Disney, Disney's going to promote its values. There's no greater cultural force than perhaps Disney across the entire globe. And so I think Disney came in with an agenda. I think in 1994, Disney tried to acquire NBC, couldn't. NBC at that time had the NBA broadcast. Disney has wanted to get in the sports lane. They got into the sports lane with ESPN because they understand, anybody in the entertainment field, entertainment industry understands that live sports is the most valuable asset for attracting a massive audience and being able to preach your values to a massive audience. Particularly in this now DVR, watch stuff when you want to era that we're in, live sports is the only thing where people sit down and watch it as it happens live. And so they wanted ESPN, they wanted in the sports world, and they wanted to apply their values, their culture to the sports world, and that's what has happened. And I think Disney, based on their attack on young kids and the sexuality and the gender thing, Disney believes in the matriarchy. Disney believes in the uprooting of the patriarchy. Disney is very feminist, and they've applied all those values to ESPN, which is the worldwide leader in sports. And that's why if you just look at sports over the last 25, 30 years since Disney has owned ESPN, sports have just become softer and more feminized.
I spoke about this in 2018 when we were seeing culture, video games, movies, seeing all the woke influx. I said it's going to be real crazy when the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Sports start being forced to adopt these things. And we're starting to see it. We spoke with Jonathan Isaac. That dude's awesome.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how he didn't want to kneel for Black Lives Matter. People got mad at him about it. He said, we had a meeting. We said, we're going to do this. And he was like, I don't believe in it, though. The crazy thing is, here's a guy. You got Colin Kaepernick who kneels. He gets ragged on for it. Well, he brought politics into the game. I understand why people might be mad about that. Well, the politics there starts spreading to everyone kneeling. And now you got a guy, Jonathan Isaac, being like, I just don't want to kneel. I don't mind if you do. And they're mad at him because he won't bend the knee. You see, I think...
And just keep in mind, everybody on ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports, is criticizing Jonathan Isaac. And Lord behold, take Drew Brees, the quarterback for the Saints, makes this comment basically defending the national anthem. And he gets assassinated, his character does, by everybody on ESPN like he's some racist pig because the national anthem means something to him, means something to people in his family that were in the service. And so that's, again, these athletes are being bullied into kneeling and adopting these values.
We're actually, this Sunday, we got a special episode. We did a podcast with Ben and Ben Shapiro and Jonathan Isaac separately. But, he was saying that he doesn't think these people believe in the message, that the players are just kind of, they're told they have to do it, and they're like, okay, whatever, I guess. And, many of them probably outright just don't like these values. I think the reality is a lot of people are Christians. I think a lot of people like families. What worries me is why aren't there more people like, Isaac, who are going to just very calmly and passionately say, look, I believe in my country. No disrespect to those who protest. I'm going to do my thing. Why can't we at least have more players like that?
I imagine it's because the paychecks are so big. Those guys, they make so much money. How can you turn away from a $90 million contract, $10 million contract over 3 years or 4 years or whatever they make? What's an average contract in the NBA right now?
Probably $5 to $8 million, but
wait, for like your average player.
For how many years?
What about your
3 to 5 years?
What about your lowest tier player, like the
lowest
bottom?
tier player is probably making $800,000, $900,000. That may, but let's take the big money people out of it. Just talking to Colin before the show, working in academia, and I talked about this today about just corporate America in general. If you want to move up in leadership at any major corporation, if you don't adopt the values of diversity, inclusion, and equity, if you don't hop on board with all the LGBT stuff, if you don't swallow it, you can't move up, or you get run out of academia. Yeah. It's the same principles are applied that you see. The pressure in the sports world is even more intense. These guys have guaranteed contracts and have made generational wealth. What if you're just a guy that works at, name the company, or Disney or anywhere, that doesn't want to hop on board with these values? You get run out. You can't move up.
Yeah, it's the same dynamic that's taking place, in sports, in academia. I mean, it's like this spiral of silence they go into where everyone else is doing this one signal, and if you have areas that tend to be, politically skewed in a certain direction, like academia, a signal that might have started out with like, I'm just putting my pronoun in my email signature or in my social media bio. These soon, rather than just being a signal of like, oh, I'm just inclusive, it then becomes the people who don't have these little things in their bios and their email signatures. That becomes a tell, because once it gets so popular, then the person who doesn't do it is the one that stands out, and now all of a sudden people can question them and, what are you doing?
I'm interested in your experience. You're an evolutionary biologist. Like with the I guess you would call it the emergence or the mainstreamism of the transgender movement, or I don't even know if you call it a movement, but just this whole, like, what's it like in the science community when you're discussing biology? And if you've got a story, or what were you going to say?
Well, no, I just want to kind of pull back a little bit what you were saying and merge these conversations. We're talking about the feminization of sports. We've got someone, you're a biologist.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about what's happening with,
you can define a woman. He's a biologist.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I think we'll get to that in a second, but let's kind of merge that. As a biologist witnessing what's happening in sports with the NCAA and all that stuff, what's your take, and what do you have to say for, what's happening? Like, what's your view on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same dynamic, and it just requires people to feel like they're comfortable enough by seeing other people who are speaking up and not getting canceled to have them speak up. I mean, when I was in academia, there was no one talking about the stuff I was talking about. I was one of the first people to be like, actually, there are only two sexes. It's not a spectrum. It's not a social construct. And, I mean, that was all the arrows hit me at once. And that's a signal to everyone to, who thinks the same way I do, that they're not going to say anything, because they see that's how it happens when the one vocal person comes up. And so it's that chilling effect. And I think that's playing out in sports, is that chilling effect when someone gets hammered in the media for their reasonable opinion. That just sends a signal to everyone else, like, oh, this is a third rail. I'm not even gonna go there.
What is this, right? We all of a sudden we have academia terrified. We have one of the most lucrative and high-paying industries, major sports, and they are terrified of this ideology.
Well, because they know they can get canceled. They know
it's a tool,
that they can get run out of their jobs and have to go independent the way that Colin has. I do want to, and I don't want to speak for Tim, but I do think what Tim was asking you, quite honestly, was like, we had a man, William Thomas, swimming against women
in
the Ivy. Oh, you were, and yeah, that's what he's like. As a biologist, what is your take? This is crazy to us.
Well, so it's completely it's completely insane. I mean, so the thing that's underpinning all of it is this gender ideology that is saying that what a man or a woman or a boy and a girl is has nothing to do with your biology, your reproductive organs or anything. It has everything to do with just your internal sense of of who you are or your identification with social roles and stereotypes of like masculinity or femininity. That's literally what they think is a man or a woman, which really goes against what we've been hearing feminists say for so long, that, you know, a woman can behave any way they want to and still be a woman. You can be a masculine woman, you can be a feminine woman, you can be a feminine man, you can be a masculine man, but you're fundamentally defined as a man or woman by your reproductive anatomy. Somehow this ideology has just taken root. I think a lot of it's because you see these big organizations like the ACLU, like the Human Rights Campaign. They had all this funding, billions of dollars going into something like getting gay marriage passed, which I personally think was a good thing to get passed. But once they get that big victory, what do next? They're set up in a situation where they need to find something else to put all this money into. They have all these donors. They're not just going to turn their lights off, shutter the windows, and say like, well, we won. Time to go home. There's no more big dragons to slay. And if you look at where the funding went in these organizations, it used to be all going into gay marriage. And then, what was it, 2014 or 15 when it became federally legal?
14, I think.
Yeah, then you see the narrative switch to trans everything. And it's this gender ideology. And it's this built-in apparatus with billions of dollars behind it that is just shunting this money into 0.5% of the population. And we have no response to it. We haven't built up the organizations to respond to this thing now that isn't the next.
I used to work in nonprofits. I did fundraising, and this was one of the things I witnessed. A good nonprofit should put itself out of business.
Yeah.
If you say, "Hey, we got an issue with there's not enough panda bears," well, you know, maybe in 20, 30 years, all of a sudden, panda bears are no longer endangered anymore. What does the nonprofit do? Waves goodbye to everybody and says, "Mission accomplished. This was the goal. We saved the panda bear." What these organizations will do is they'll say, well, it was never about the pandas. What about the kangaroo? What about this new songbird? They don't want to cease to exist. They like the power they've accrued.
They transition.
Well, and they have people on their, they're paying people. They have paychecks. They have they have.
Lydia got my job.
They have employees.
Exactly. I think Greenpeace is a good example of this. I briefly worked for Greenpeace, and the one thing I didn't understand, and I started looking at. I think what's the lady? Do you know the guy, the Greenpeace guy's name? Doctor? Is it? It's not. I think it's Patrick Moore, right?
Yeah.
We're
gonna have him, I think. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I know there's also a Paul Watson who left, and he's the Sea Shepherds guy. But I believe Patrick Moore's the name. Can you guys check?
Yeah, I'm looking
because he's pro nuclear power.
Oh yeah.
And so he's been very vocal on similar issues as us.
Yeah, Patrick Moore.
Patrick Moore. So Greenpeace, it starts because they're opposing nuclear testing. I respect that. I don't like the nuclear bombs being tested and the devastating effects. It blanketed this planet with radioactive particles that interferes with scientific instruments. So it's not good that everybody on the planet was blowing things up to test things. And so they oppose it. And they would do things like send out boats into the area so they couldn't conduct tests. And I'm like, I dig it. Now they're saying nuclear energy is bad. Why? In my personal opinion, because nuclear is a scary word. It allows them to keep the company going and make money. And there's reasons why people like Patrick Moore leave, because they're like, you're off mission. This is not what we're supposed to be doing. These nonprofits, I agree. I think it's a really important point that often doesn't get brought up. I remember I was working for a nonprofit that did fundraising, and one of the organizations they were fundraising on behalf of was the Human Rights Campaign, the HRC. Apparently, and I could be getting this wrong, I was not high up or anything, but there was a conversation where there are a few organizations that were rejecting some bill because it granted certain rights to LGB people, but not T people. And so the Human Rights Campaign was like, we're going to go for this because it's a win. These other organizations were like, no, you shouldn't. So there was a point where they were willing to outright be like, we will advocate for laws that do not protect this group of people. I wonder now if it's just part of the process that once you get certain laws passed, now you can move on to your next mission and make sure the money keeps flowing. You need more scare tactics. I think you hit the nail on the head with a large portion of what we're seeing. Activism can't stop. There's money to be made.
This is why we're focusing on microaggressions now. We've ran out of macro ones.
Yep.
We skipped the deci aggressions, and we're going to be moving on to pico aggressions next, I think.
We've run out of... We have a very short supply of racism, and so now racism is... oh, you didn't call me by my proper name. I think we just had a baseball player, a baseball first base coach, I think, just yesterday for the San Francisco Giants, he got called a MF. I can say motherfucker probably on this show.
Sure, why not?
He got called a
We do try to be family friendly, but
Oh.
we're not gonna
Alright,
cry
he-
about
well,
swear words.
he got called an MF, and he said that when the guy said it, it reeked of racism.
What?
I didn't know, literally. And so, because there's such a short supply of racism, we've had to expand what is racism. And so now, if in the heat of a sports battle, if you call someone an MF and they happen to be black and you happen to be white, that reeks of racism. I want to, if I can, and I think I can do this on this show, not because I think you guys are going to agree with me, but I just want to say it because Colin said something interesting, and Tim, you push me back in line if I'm taking the conversation somewhere you don't want it to go. But Tim said, or Colin said that you agreed with same-sex marriage and thought it was a good thing. I have to sit here and say I disagree with that, and not because I have a problem with the LGBT crowd, the gay crowd, or whatever. I think we've moved in the society where we think everything is for everybody. And I don't think everything is for everybody. Tim's jeans, they're not for me, so I should not try to squeeze into them. And I don't think there was a long period in my life where I was very irresponsible in my dating and sexual life, and I was never in the right mindset to be married. Marriage wasn't for me. I had no control over, and so I think we've moved to where we want to make everything for everybody. And so I think my sexual promiscuity, no different than same-sex attraction, it makes me not an ideal candidate for marriage.
I agree with the majority of the sentiment that not everything is for everybody, and absolutely, it seems like, you know, it's like the Sarcastaball in South Park where they make all the kids wear the goofy things and the football becomes a balloon. When you try to make everything equal, then, you know, what do? You got to cut off the tall grass. However, when I look at the issue of gay marriage, I agree with Colin. I think this is an interesting conversation. I think it's good. I think it's good in the sense that LGBTQIA plus people should not be discriminated against based on those characteristics. There's questions in what that means when it manifests, like who gets access to specific spaces, like women's only spaces. Does it mean female or otherwise? I think that's part of the conversation we have. But I mean, like, you can't throw someone out of your business for specific reasons. You know, like we want to be, public accommodations should be equal to all, and we should have. This is my view. It's the more liberal view, I suppose. But I think that if you're a part of society, you're paying taxes, and we're all funding this machine, then you should be able to accommodate someone and not arbitrarily be like, I don't like the way you look, so get out. But within within reason, you can still do that anyway. You can give someone no reason and say, oh, you said a naughty word, and so I have the right to refuse service to anybody. It becomes increasingly impossible to actually maintain control of people's views and opinions. Good. But anyway, just to the point of gay marriage, the question I had when Prop 8 was happening, I think this was in California, was, isn't marriage specifically an Abrahamic institution, which is rooted in going to the church and saying vows before God? If that's the case, then I don't believe it is appropriate for the state to mandate what the church does. However, if the state recognizes marriage as some legal contract with legal ramifications, those must be granted to anybody. Now, there are certainly questions about, you know, what the right has brought up, polygamy and things like that. And I'm like, well, there was polygamy a long time ago. It's not here now. We're just talking about cultural shifts and cultural changes. But if there are two people who love each other, and this is the current standard we're in, I think, you know, LGBTQIA+, they should be able to get married and live together, and they should have all of the tax rights and legal rights. I don't want to hear another story about, you know, two men who love each other, and one guy gets sick, and his husband isn't allowed to go in and see him as he's dying. That's a horrifying story, because it's a man and his brother. You know, his brother gets cancer. He can go in and see him. These two guys spend their whole lives together. They love each other. Look, I don't think that's any of my business. One of the things that arises that's changing everything is going after kids, right? I'm not saying, you know, I think if there's a teacher in a school who's gay, and a kid walks up and sees a picture and says, "Who's that?" The teacher can say, "That's my husband." And the kid can say, but you're a boy. How do you have a husband?" The teacher should then say, "Well, maybe you'll learn more about this when you're older. Ask your parents." It's really that simple. When they start saying they want mandatory education on very specific things, where some of these books have been particularly graphic, that's when I'm like, yo, we are not talking about civil rights for an individual. We are not talking about me saying I want to make sure that the people I know and care about are able to be there for their loved ones. We're talking about going to kids and explaining in detail, 5 to 9-year-olds, serious adult things that it should not be up to them. It should be up to the parents. And sometimes there might be parents who are like, my 6-year-old is ready. Okay, well, I personally disagree. I think 6 is a bit too young. You should maybe wait till they're getting closer to puberty, but I'm not the parent. So there are still limitations to where we as a society have to decide what is abuse and what isn't.
Talking about marriage a little bit, I think you make a really good point. You got to define what it is and what it means. I think that in the church, it's a union under God, essentially. And I'm not 100% familiar, but it's really about like a almost like a magical union with your soul. But then when you talk about marriage in the state, it's just a business contract. And the way I look at it at this current state is I'm treating it like a business contract. I want to give my wife money, my girlfriend, and I don't want to get taxed on it. So I'm going to marry her so I can give her a bunch of money. And stop. My love for her is irrelevant. It's just a business deal. But I'm interested how you guys, and I think that that's maybe the conversation people in society should have when discussing who should be able to do what when it pertains to marriage and what it actually means. And then and people sometimes you'll say like, well, civil union, then you get all the digital rights without calling it marriage. But then they're like, no, I want to label it the same. I want to be treated the same. Then you start getting into identity politics.
Yeah. Well, I think what Jason was saying earlier and what you were getting at was the sort of slippery slope you get into where like you have a movement like the LGBTQ plus IA2 whatever, and the reason that those letters keep expanding is because they've defined themselves by we're the most inclusive group ever. We're going to just accept anyone who's atypical, any axis you can imagine, and that leads to them not being able to just really push out the fringes of the people that really shouldn't be part of their groups. You know, like there's some organizations that will want to add the P, which is the pedophile, to like these types of groups.
The P is silent.
And they can't police their borders because we're so inclusive. It's an orientation, and by that, like they need to be able to police their borders to some degree because some people are just bad people. Some people, and certain ideologies as well.
Maybe the P could mean police.
Have you guys, police for sure. Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to watch live, you can check out this channel Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Now, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and if you want more unfiltered and uncensored content with all of these guests, go to timcast.com and become a member. All of these guests you know and love in exclusive segments on our website where we are unrestricted in what we talk about, so you'll definitely not want to miss it. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time.